Evolution isn't true.
Says who?
Says people who don't know what evolution is. Like the people who make these videos, for example.
Your mom?
What?
Today, we're entering part 3 of our mini-series on the terrible classroom videos from Genesis Apologetics. This one's about to get real rough real fast, so before we jump right in, I just want to say thank you to my patrons on Patreon and my channel members here on YouTube, and I want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, because the channel's been growing faster than usual lately, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Anyway, Paul's about to say something so wrong that it's going to take me like 5 solid minutes to correct it, so let's not waste any more time. Welcome back to Reacteria.
What?
Well, mitochondrial DNA is passed on from our moms. And while evolutionists say that human evolution started about 100,000 years ago, some controversial mitochondrial DNA says that it may have started much more recently.
Human evolution didn't start 100,000 years ago. That is absolute nonsense for several reasons. The first thing is that just our species, Homo sapiens, goes back around 200 to 300,000 years. We used to say that our species was only 100,000 years old, but that's because that was the age of the oldest remains of anatomically modern Homo sapiens that we had at the time. But then we found new evidence of our species existing way earlier than that, like the Omo remains in Ethiopia, which are around 200,000 years old, or the remains at Jebel Irud, which are around 300,000 years old. But even if we went with the 100,000 year figure, we're still just talking about when the earliest known anatomically modern Homo sapiens existed, not when they started evolving. And of course, there's also the issue that while we call our species human, strictly speaking, anything in the genus Homo could also be called human. So if we're talking about the start of humans, not just Homo sapiens, we're looking back around 2.6 million years ago to the first member of our genus, Homo habilis, who also wasn't the start of human evolution. This video just gets more wrong the more you think about it. But the writers don't want you to think about it, which is why they didn't think about it. They just heard the number 100,000 years attached to human evolution somewhere and never even bothered to check what they were arguing against before they dumped their ignorance on you. Now, as far as this stuff about mitochondrial DNA goes, that is also far different than what they're making it out to be. And they elaborate a little bit on what they mean in this next part. Take a listen.
Well, they showed that the observed DNA mutation rates actually point back to the first woman about 6,500 years ago.
That is also complete nonsense. Just so we're all on the same page, your mitochondria have their own DNA, and they're usually passed down through egg cells because the mitochondria and the sperm cells are all in the tail, which usually breaks off during fertilization. Now, of course, there are exceptions to all of this, but the point is that humans typically get their mitochondria and the DNA that they contain from their mothers. And if you go far enough back, there is a single female human from which all of us get our mitochondrial DNA. And this person is poetically named Mitochondrial Eve. Now, it should be no surprise to anyone that creationists like to pretend that this person was the literal Eve from the Bible, or, as this awful teacher just said, that we evolutionists have found the first woman. But that is not what mitochondrial Eve means, nor is it how genetics works. You see, within a population of organisms, as genes are passed down from one generation to the next, there's always a possibility that one specific version of a gene will be more successful than all the others. And eventually, the frequency of a certain version, that is to say, the number of individuals in that particular population that have that particular version in that particular generation, reaches 0% or 100%. This may sound a bit like natural selection, but that's actually not what we're talking about here. This all happens through a process called genetic drift, or the relatively random reshuffling of genes within a population. Now, that's a whole other thing that we can talk about later. What you need to know right now is that the result is one copy of a gene, or in this case, one version of mitochondrial DNA, becoming fixed within the population, meaning that everybody's mitochondrial DNA is the same. Here's a handy diagram to show how this works. Notice that the pink lineage isn't the first one, and there are plenty of others that exist for generations alongside it, but eventually it represents the entire population. That's how mitochondrial Eve works. She wasn't the first woman, and she was never the only woman, but her mitochondrial DNA eventually became fixed across all of humanity. And also, it's not exactly her mitochondrial DNA. Hers is just like the template for everybody's mitochondrial DNA. There have been mutations since then in different populations, so we still see variations. It's a whole thing. But that's not the only silly claim being made here. The teacher and Paul also say that scientists recently discovered a difference in the mutation rate of mitochondrial DNA, and that lands mitochondrial Eve around 6,500 years ago. And
well, the Science Journal is also saying that evolutionists are more concerned with a faster mutation rate, probably because it contradicts human evolution.
which isn't even remotely true. Literally the only source that I could find talking about the possibility of mitochondrial Eve being around 6,000 years old that wasn't a young Earth creationist website is this one paper published by Ann Gibbons in the journal Science in 1998, which talks about different ways of calibrating what's known as the molecular clock, which just means looking at an ancestral genetic state and a modern genetic state and using a known mutation rate to try to estimate how long it took to go from one to the other. In this paper, the author discusses situations in which mutations can happen relatively quickly and how that can throw off our estimations. Then, near the end of the paper, she says that a new molecular clock model with a faster mutation rate overall could put our estimation of mitochondrial Eve at around 6,000 years ago rather than around 200,000 years ago, which is when every other model since the 1970s has suggested that she lived. Quote, regardless of the cause, evolutionists are most concerned about the effect of a faster mutation rate. For example, researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose mitochondrial DNA was ancestral to that in all living people, lived 100,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. And naturally, because one scientist mentioned something that sort of sounded like it may be aligned with the Bible one time, the charlatans and mountebanks at places like the Institute for Creation Research are calling this admission a massive bombshell, as they do in this video titled 6 Biological Evidences for Creation. Remember, the only reference that I was able to find on this was a single paper published in Science in 1998. Tell me that's not what they're talking about here.
And what's really interesting is that in the late 1990s, there was a secular conventional study done by scientists that actually looked at the variation in the mitochondrial genome, and they said that the mitochondrial genome was about 7,000 years old. And I think it was published in Science is where that was published, and then after that, all the evolutionists began freaking out.
But of course, they're deliberately ignoring the facts that not all mitochondrial DNA across humans is actually identical, that our database and mapping of human mitochondrial DNA is very incomplete, that same molecular clock model puts Y chromosomal Adam, the human from which we all get our Y chromosomes if we have Y chromosomes, over 100,000 years before mitochondrial Eve, that the paper also says that there are easy explanations for these changes in mitochondrial DNA that don't dramatically change the molecular clock model, or the fact that the very next sentence after that one about mitochondrial Eve possibly being 6,000 years old starts with the words, "No one thinks that's the case." This paper isn't claiming that mitochondrial Eve lived 6,000 years ago. The author is just talking about the possible implications and challenges of adopting a new molecular clock model, as well as arguments against that model. No one is suggesting that human genetics actually align with the biblical timeline, nor is anybody concerned with a faster mutation rate contradicting evolution. And while we're on the topic, putting mitochondrial Eve 6,000 years ago wouldn't just contradict evolution. It would contradict forensics, archaeology, and everything that we know about human dispersal all around the world. We literally have writing and artifacts and human remains and all sorts of other proof that humans lived in different places across the globe well before 6,000 years ago. So putting mitochondrial Eve tens of thousands of years after humans settled in places like Australia, where they would be completely genetically isolated for millennia, would be impossible because there's no way for her mitochondrial DNA to get to them. Once again, this isn't a serious scientific discussion. This is just another example of a creationist hearing one single sentence said by one single scientist over 20 years ago and using that to claim that everything we know about biology is wrong.
Well, these discoveries have even contributed to the development of new research guidelines used by the FBI in forensic investigations.
Those applications use techniques that these people say aren't reliable because they're based in historical science, by the way. As always, when the evidence shows evolution, it's wrong and faith-based. But when that same evidence can be misinterpreted to question evolution, it's trustworthy and authoritative.
But I'd say it's mere coincidence that these ages coincide with the Bible.
Or is it?
Who are you talking to? Why is now the time you chose to break the fourth wall?
Okay, now on to Lucy,
And just like that, we're back to Lucy.
the single best example we have of human evolution.
And that's still not true.
Just a small pile of bones.
Well, this isn't just any pile of bones. These are replicas of the bone fragments of Lucy.
Could you show us all of her skull fragments, please?
And we're back to the skull fragments.
Well, they actually didn't find much. It's just these pieces here.
What about a vertebrae, neck vertebrae?
And we're back to the single neck vertebra.
Well, they only found one neck vertebra, but they later discovered it didn't belong to Lucy. It belonged to an extinct monkey.
We literally covered all of this in the first video. They're just recycling their own talking points now for worse content. Just to recap, the skull fragments they found are highly diagnostic, meaning they tell us a ton about the animal and we aren't just making guesses. The single neck vertebra was misidentified, but there are several other vertebrae that weren't, and Lucy isn't the only specimen of her species, nor is she anywhere close to the best example we have of human evolution. Sweet Gilgamesh, I'm sick of saying that.
What about her wrists? Were they like ours, or were they locked in place for chimp walking?
Here's a wrist bone. They locked just like chimps today.
She also had an anterior foramen magnum, which kept her skull on top of her spine, not in front of it like a chimp, an S-shaped spine, showing that she stood upright in a way that you couldn't get with a C-shaped spine like a chimp has, 5 lumbar vertebrae, which is the same number that we have, not the number that chimps have, flared iliac blades to make a bowl-shaped pelvis with big muscle attachment for large gluteal muscles, unlike what we see in chimps, a valgus knee that was angled under her pelvis as opposed to the parallel knees that chimps have, 3 arches to her foot, and an inline non-opposable big toe, all of which are totally different than anything chimps have going on, and all sorts of other adaptations that clearly and unequivocally demonstrate that she was an obligate biped, meaning she didn't just walk upright for short distances sometimes like chimps do, she walked upright by necessity for her entire adult life. And none of that even touches on the Laetoli footprints, which they lied about in an earlier video, which were laid down by Lucy's same species 400,000 years before she was ever born. This is what we call mosaic evolution. There are a ton of adaptations that go into bipedal walking, so it doesn't make sense to say that Lucy's species just got all of them all at once. They came about bit by bit over a very long time across several different species. So saying that her wrist bones may have been able to walk isn't evidence that she walked on her knuckles like a chimp does, because that goes against a suite of characteristics all over the rest of her body, many of which specifically make knuckle walking impossible.
Where are her feet and hand bones?
Where's your microphone?
They actually didn't find any.
But they did find the feet and hand bones of other members of her species, so we don't really need them.
Well, that didn't stop them from putting them on every statue of her in any museum I've seen.
Yeah, and the abundant evidence of human evolution didn't stop you from listening to great value Kirk Cameron either, but here we are.
You may have heard that human and chimp DNA are 98% similar.
Well, it depends on how you slice it. The 98.8% figure is flashy and popular, but that's only counting substitutions in the genes that we both share. If you also compare things like deletions and duplications and such, it's closer to like 94 or 95%, and that's also not even the only model.
Well, that's not quite accurate.
That's literally what I was just getting to.
First, the chimp genome was about 4% larger than the human. Second, they only compared similar sections from each genome when they came up with a 98% similarity figure, also excluding 25% of the human DNA and 18% of the chimp DNA.
Okay, first of all, why does it sound like this is the first time you've ever said the word genome? Secondly, why is Robert Pattinson in the back of the room? And third, and most importantly, this teacher is the freaking worst. This could be such a cool discussion about how these comparisons are done, and he's just blowing it.
Well, how similar were the two genomes when they were compared side by side?
Between 66% and 84% at most.
In the 6 to 9 million years since the human and chimp lineages diverged, we've both changed a lot in pretty unique ways. For example, 2 human chromosomes fused together, leaving us with 23 pairs as opposed to chimps who have 24 pairs. So that means when we compare our genomes, we have to decide how to actually do that. Do we do it letter by letter or gene by gene? If a huge section of DNA is duplicated in one genome, do we count that as one difference or as thousands of differences for each individual duplicated letter? What if the same gene appears on a different chromosome? Is that a difference because they're in different places or not because it's the same gene? And so in order to get around all these issues, most models just exclude these big differences and focus on what can actually be compared. And this isn't unique to humans and chimps. This is how we tell similar genomes across any two species, no matter what taxa. And it's also not as dramatic of a choice as creationists like to pretend. Remember, small changes in DNA produce the massive differences between Chihuahuas and Irish Wolfhounds, which are still the same species. Whereas things like rats and mice or Asian and African elephants, which look super similar and are undeniably related, have much greater genetic differences than humans and chimps. Again, this isn't a bombshell argument if you acknowledge the fact that the popular comparison model that everybody talks about is just one comparison model. If we compared everything's genomes differently, then they would all have different levels of similarity, which means it would all come out in the wash anyway.
Okay. I know evolutionists needed that 98% to be able to support the idea that humans branched off about 6 million years ago.
We didn't need anything to support our narrative. Just because you don't know how to think without dogma doesn't mean that we don't, dude.
So if it's only actually 84%, wouldn't that be too many genetic changes for the evolutionary timeline?
No, actually it supports it, considering the fact that the modern human genome didn't develop from the modern chimp genome. Because we both have been making different variations on a single ancestral genome, we would expect to see exaggerated differences. The point here is that it's remarkable that we're still so similar, not so different.
So, wait, they didn't find a single one?
Technically, they haven't found any complete Homo habilis skeletons, not even close to complete.
This may come as a surprise to you, but complete isn't a requirement for fossils. If that was the case, we wouldn't have a reason to believe in the existence of almost any ancient organisms, or even many species that went extinct since humans have been around. There are very, very few specimens in the entire fossil record which are 100% complete.
Even though Homo habilis, or handyman, is one of the better known icons of human evolution, they found about 100 bone fragments they assigned to Homo habilis.
But in our textbooks, in our museums, and even online, they're shown looking complete.
That's called a reconstruction, Paul. We take the skulls that we have from these guys, like these ones that videos like this will absolutely never show you, and rebuild the muscles and facial features and whatnot that every ape has, using the muscle attachments visible on the bones as guides. It's the same way that it's done in modern forensics. And as for the rest of the body, we know that it was bipedal because we have some remarkably complete specimens that show things like the position of the foramen magnum, and we also have more than enough bones from across the rest of their body to know other things like their average sizes and their limb proportions and how they probably moved around. Honestly, this is all pretty cool stuff if you're willing to dig into it, but the people who make these videos just refuse to understand that there are two types of people in the world. Those who can extrapolate from incomplete data.
They have human eyes and eye whites, which apes don't have.
Other apes absolutely have sclera, and it's genuinely astonishing to me that these people's indoctrination strategy is to simply pray that no one knows how to use Google Images.
And then, down later on in our textbook, it says that Homo habilis was becoming human because they used stone tools nearby. But how do we know if those were used by them, or rather used on them?
Homo habilis wasn't becoming human. They were a species of human. And as far as stone tools go, who else would have used them? There are no modern human remains down among the Homo habilis remains. So even if you were to say there was some other species responsible for making and using these stone tools, you'd just be up the same creek with even less paddles. Not only would you need to find a specimen in those same layers alongside that other species that could have used these tools, you'd still have to account for the progressive change in tool use seen across the archaeological record, all leading up to us. You've solved nothing, Paul. You've just made things weirder.
We don't. They have found thousands of bones from other butchered animals in the same area. They even found a 12-foot circular hut foundation in the same rock bed.
That, to me, sounds like modern humans were living there, eating and butchering animals like Homo habilis. I don't think they were evolving.
So, just to be clear, when we have incomplete fossils of species like Australopithecus afarensis or Homo habilis, that's a good reason to question their validity. But when we have no fossils of modern Homo sapiens whatsoever in this area, that's a good reason to believe that they actually existed millions of years before we thought and used totally different tools than we thought to hunt other species of humans whose existence you still can't account for, and also that the entire concept of things like tool evolution and material culture just mean nothing. I'm starting to feel like these videos may be boring a hole into my brain. It's a good thing I have Brilliant to fill it back in. If you've ever wanted to get into science but felt like those big concepts just weren't clicking, then Brilliant is the app for you. Rather than just watching someone explain things, Brilliant lets you work through problems yourself, building powerful critical thinking and problem-solving skills along the way. But what I like most about Brilliant is that it meets you where you are. Its interactive lessons are designed by experts from places like Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, and its personalized practice adapts to your level so that you can build real understanding at your own pace, instead of just memorizing formulas and hoping for the best. And if you want to give Brilliant a try, you can get started for free for a full 30 days by going to brilliant.org/forrestvalkai, scanning the QR code on the screen, or clicking the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium, which gives you unlimited access to everything Brilliant has to offer. Brilliant has thousands of lessons in math, science, programming, and more, and they're adding new content all the time. If you're not sure where to start, I always recommend the Scientific Thinking course. It's a great way to build the kind of wonder and intuition that carries over into everything else. So if you're ready to start thinking a little harder and learning a little faster, head on over to brilliant.org/forrestvalkai, scan the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description. Remember, you get to try everything Brilliant has to offer absolutely free for a full 30 days, and you get 20% off an annual subscription to Brilliant Premium when you use my links. You fool! I was here the whole time!
Millions of years of human evolution can fit inside of a shoebox?
Maybe. How big are your feet?
Well, yes, but I need to clarify.
Well, you said the Lucy fossil was the best example of human evolution from around 4 million years ago.
Actually, Lucy was 3.2 million years ago, and I can't stress enough that she is not the best example of human... Who cares?
But what about the other million years, say 2 or 3 million years?
We have a huge amount of other fossils, accounting for a wide variety of different species going back through that entire timeline, but your teacher's probably just going to say something about how the fossil record has a bunch of gaps, isn't she?
Well, the fossil record is actually quite sparse during that period.
Farts, dude.
National Geographic says, fossils attributed to Homo in the period 2 to 3 million years ago are exceedingly rare.
That quote is from this article from 2015. We've learned a lot since then. And incidentally, it's where they got the line about the shoebox as well. They just conveniently ignored the fact that the scientist was very clearly talking about fossils from that one specific 1 million year period fitting in a shoebox, not all of the fossils from millions of years of human evolution fitting in a shoebox, which is what they said.
Millions of years of human evolution can fit inside of a shoebox?
And the director of the Institute of Human Origins at ASU even said you could put all the bones in a shoebox and still fit a good pair of shoes.
They literally just doubled down on the lie. Also, what a weird way to script that. Why did Paul react to what she just said now back at the beginning of the video?
It makes me wonder how many bones altogether supposedly show humans evolved.
According to Dr. Tattersall, the curator of anthropology department at the American Museum of Natural History, he says this: you could fit all of them into the back of a pickup truck if you didn't mind how much you jumbled everything up.
That's weak, really weak.
That quote was from Bill Bryson's book, A Short History of Nearly Everything, which was published back in 2003, so even older than the shoebox quote. And ignoring that, you guys know that fossils aren't the only evidence we have of human ancestry, right? You get that there are multiple lines of evidence, all pointing to the same thing, and science isn't just all about saying, here's a fossil, now I know how evolution were. The point is, if a biologist ever says research into evolution is meaningless without context, you can be darn sure a creationist will come along and proclaim that the biologists have finally admitted that research into evolution is meaningless.
Artie is significant because we believe she walked upright based on where her spine enters her skull.
No, Artie is significant because she's the first and most complete specimen of a species called Ardipithecus ramidus, and she actually has several adaptations that hint at both upright walking and life in the trees, so it's much more likely that she was what we would call a facultative biped, meaning she walked upright on the ground and then moved on all fours while climbing, sort of like how gibbons and stuff do things today.
Was the skull complete, like shown in the Science Journal?
Again, the skull doesn't have to be complete. We can do reconstructions, and we also have other specimens.
Actually, no. They reconstructed it from over 110 bone fragments found over a 30-foot area.
Right. So
what was that? Did you forget your line? It's almost certainly in the binder right there in front of you.
So how did her spine enter her skull from the pieces that they found? Because I mean, there's not much to go on there. Did they find any neck vertebrae?
There's a ton to go on there when you piece it all back together, and again, she's not the only specimen. We have other Ardipithecus specimens with cervical vertebrae, and we have other fossils of other species, both before and after Ardipithecus, all of which show the spine entering the bottom of the skull like what you're asking for here.
Well, actually, again, no. We have no neck vertebrae.
So let me get this straight. So they have no base of the skull.
We do have the base of the skull.
They guessed on where the spine entered the skull.
We don't need to guess where the spine entered the skull.
And they have no neck vertebrae?
I seriously don't know how to make this any easier. You don't need neck vertebrae to see the hole that they connect to, Paul. I think that's all the videos we have time for today. These were all about human stuff, and the next ones start to change the tone a little bit, so we'll just leave those for next time. If there's anything to take away from this, it's that the people at Genesis Apologetics are still liars, so nothing new there. They misrepresent scientific ideas, they over-exaggerate or leave out key points of evidence to suit their narrative, and they lie about what real scientists say so often that if you ever hear them claim something that a scientist said, you can pretty much just assume that that scientist actually said the exact opposite, and you'll almost always be right. We've still got a handful of these videos left, so I'll see you next time when we probably finish off the series. We'll see what happens. But until then, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff we do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop, pick up one of my sweet t-shirts. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye.